Welcome back, everybody, to visiting in with me and my good friend Chancey here on March of 2023 already.
Good morning, Brad. Good morning, everyone. Happy to be back with y'all today.
Man, we hadn't talked to you since November, I guess it was. And
Yep.
Now here we are at springtime, and we're transitioning, I guess you'd say. It's been quite an odd winter here in Central Texas this year, where it's been anywhere from 85 degrees down to dang near 14, 12 degrees, I guess, at certain times. And for those of you not familiar with our area, well, we struggled through quite an ice storm here and within the last month, I guess you'd say, that you can still drive down the roads and see remnants of, as there's limbs still laying everywhere.
Yeah, it's been a roller coaster ride. It really has. It's just the cleanup that's been and you know what's crazy? That ice storm, I have buddies that live in northeast Texas, and they didn't get any ice. It just came down the heart, like the middle of Central Texas, and stopped just north of San Antonio, and didn't go any further than that. It was really weird how that ice storm didn't, affect places in northeast Texas, just kind of the middle of it.
Well, yeah, really odd. As I mentioned before, we have this feed store here, and people will come in from, not even that far up the road, and they were coming into town, and they'd be like, "Did y'all have a tornado here? Or what kind of a disaster happened here?" It did look like that.
I'll take that dang 2020 snow, or 2021's blizzard snow way over that ice. It looked just like a tornado came through, debris everywhere.
Yeah, so if you're not familiar with our area, well, we did get that, and it came just freezing weather and sleet and rain for a good 3-4 days, I guess it was, and just built up on the power lines and built up in the trees, and following a hot summer last summer and a summer of drought, it was a 1-2 punch for a lot of the trees around here.
Sure was. It was really funny about that line because I was working down in Freer, way South Texas, and I remember driving home. I was like, you know what? I know it's bad, but it's like 35 degrees. I was like, I'll just keep driving north, and as soon as I see ice on the road, that's when I'll start, not driving 75 miles an hour anymore. But anyway, I went into Seguin, and I was going to take the toll road, and I got on the toll road. It was unbelievable, that line, because I was looking at my thermometer on my truck, said 35, and I kid you not, I drove about 4 miles north on the toll road from I-10, and about 4 miles, my temperature, it went to 30 degrees, and ice was just everywhere. It was that line was that dramatic. It was really neat. And then driving on into town was just like that all the way, home to Milam County. It was just ice everywhere, but that line was like it stopped.
Yes, and what's odd about it is every tree species, it seemed, almost got beat up equally as bad.
I think the ones that had leaves on them still, so for our area, like the water oaks hadn't dropped all yet, and even the live oaks. So the trees that still had leaves on them, that's why the live oaks really took it in the short. They just had more surface area, so that ice was able to accumulate more and more on them, and I think that's what caused even more damage. Because I know on my place, the water oaks, which still had leaves on them, got way, way worse damage than the post oaks that didn't have leaves on them.
Yes, I agree with you. It looked that way around the school over there too, where the trees with the leaves. One tree out of 4 of them had leaves on it, and it just took a beating. It shredded that tree. Mm-hmm. And the ones around it that had lost their leaves, they fared pretty well.
Yeah, they still had some damage. A branch might have come off, but we're talking about the entire canopies of these trees. That it basically knocked off the entire third of the tree. Even if it was a really 60-foot tall tree, you're looking at 20 feet of it's gone now. It opened up the entire canopy of the trees.
Yes.
Many of them.
And so I think me and Chancey, through our scientific exploration during that event, figured out the age-old mystery of if a tree falls in the woods and nobody's around to hear it, doesn't make a sound.
Oh, man. I tell you, it was amazing. I got in that night. I want to say it was a Friday night. I don't remember what day it was, but it was night. I got home about 10 o'clock that night in that ice and couldn't even get down the driveway. Everything was just hanging. But I got there, and I was talking to my wife, and I was standing outside. It was cold, but it was the most amazing thing I'd ever witnessed in my life because I timed it. Every 5 seconds, you just hear boom, boom, boom. It's just crashing everywhere. All the tops of these trees were just falling out, and every 5 seconds there was just crashing all around me. It was one of the most amazing things I ever heard in my life.
Well, see,
because it was loud, and it just did it for days and days and days.
See, that's the difference in me and Chancey. He lives in the Post Oak Savannah where there's lots of trees in his neck of the woods out there. But now you go out where I live in the black dirt farmland, there's hardly any trees. And so we had power the whole time because there wasn't a tree out there to fall on a power line. whereas Chancey, on the other hand, over there.
But we were very blessed, though, where I live. I couldn't believe it. Those narrow power lines, we never lost power. The lights flickered a few times, but thank God we never lost power. We had neighbors that did and other friends did and stuff, but, knock on wood, where we were at, I couldn't believe it because I just knew we were going to lose it. I even broke the generator out. I was ready because, there's no way. We probably would have if the wind would have really picked up.
Well, you're right. That's what was a saving grace.
Yes.
It never got real windy.
Yes,
and,
thank God.
Me and Chancey, back when we were in school, I don't know that we had more than 1 or 2 ice days in 13 years of being in school that I remember.
Oh, I
when they actually canceled school for,
Yes.
this, that, and the other. But, man, the last few years with the snow a couple years ago and now the ice this year, I mean, it's really turning into an annual event. We got another week off of school this year because of that ice storm. You couldn't even drive down the roads because of power lines and whatnot, and no water. Yes. A lot of people were out of water due to the pumps not pumping. Yeah. And so it's become like an annual event. But I guess it's kind of a little transition into what we're going to talk about today. But, if you think back in the summertime, whenever the oak trees were all putting on acorns, you remember what an acorn crop we had?
Yes.
I mean, the oak trees were loaded with acorns. I mean,
there was
solid.
a lot of small ones. I saw there was some trees that's full of acorns, but they were smaller than normal.
They were, but there were
a bunch of them.
And so then there were people who, once again, coming in the feed store, and the old timers said, "Oh man, that means it's about to be a cold winter. It's going to be a cold winter because they say that when the oak trees put on a large acorn crop like that we're going to have a cold winter." Mm-hmm. Well, it hadn't necessarily been a cold winter, but boy, it's been some extreme cold.
Yes, yeah. I mean, like you said, the ice storm and single-digit weather, and then the next week it'd be 80.
I know.
I mean, it's been wild, just a roller coaster. And I mean, we're used to that in Texas. It's always a roller coaster, but these extremes, like
from 85 to 14 or 12 or whatever it is pretty weird.
Yes.
And so. I guess the big snow event a couple years ago really proved the importance of having an up-to-date power grid for the state. Mm-hmm. Now this ice storm kind of pointed out the importance of keeping your underbrush and stuff cleared out from under, or your limbs from growing over the top of the power lines and stuff like that. Because I know that they're clearing out a lot of right-of-ways and stuff right now just to prevent that for future events, I guess you'd say.
Oh, yeah, and that's why places in town like West Austin and all that, or in Austin area, like those people, they're not rural folks, so they like all the trees and having it. They really don't want some of those trees limbed, and they need to be limbed and stuff, and that's why they're having, like Austin just really got hit hard with all the limbs and electric and the power damage, and a lot of it's just because of a lot of the landowners won't let them limb and take care of it the way they ought to be taken care of. But like I said, they learn now. So
something like that happens and you run out of power for a while. Yep. Yeah, you realize the need for maintenance.
Yes,
isn't that the truth? And so the tree trimming people were very happy. I mean, man, I've seen them rolling around in Rolls Royces and stuff. Man. They really fared well from that whole event. And there's still work to be done out there. Like Chancey said, he's still cleaning limbs up out there where he lives, and it took me about a day to get the limbs cleaned up at our house off the 3 trees that we do have. But that kind of transitions us into what we're going to talk about today partially, which is oak trees.
Yeah. So we wanted to talk about oak trees and kind of the different strategies. And, it's on a lot of our minds right now because every single one of us at some point in the last month has been picking up limbs, and hauling brush and burning brush. I know I have for a month now.
So if you forgot that you had an oak tree, well, you were reminded this year that what you have out there.
Yes. So oak trees, let's just talk about oak trees because I'm fascinated with oaks. I've studied them. I've read about them. Oak forest history and oak forest ecology is bottomland hardwood management, wildlife. I mean, they're one of probably the most important tree species in all of history and wildlife and everything.
Well, this is one of the things that you really studied in your master's program in school, wasn't it?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I studied oak regeneration, but for a specific it's called Quercus sinuata variety. Sinuata, what we call the Durand oak. It used to be called Quercus durandii. And it's, it grows in calcareous soils on the Blackland Prairie. We don't have very many of them. They're just not regenerating. But overall, a lot of oak trees aren't regenerating. We're just not seeing the regeneration on oaks, particularly even post oaks. And if you go and look around your county and stuff, you see a lot of big post oaks, but you don't see many young regeneration going on places. And it's property specific, I believe, as you drive across the landscape. So, oaks are important. Everybody loves oaks. There's beautiful landscape oak trees, oaks are a part of our history, a part of wildlife, everything. So let's just talk about oaks, because there's a lot of things that I think are interesting about oaks that people just don't know. So, for example, there's 90 different species of oak trees, depending on which botanist or plant taxonomist you talk to, if he's a lumper or a splitter, that occur north of the Rio Grande. So 90 different species of them that occur in the continental United States. Basically, there's 45 in the east and 45 in the west.
And many of them native.
Yes, all of them are native, other than some ones that we've brought in for ornamentals or landscaping and stuff. One of the botanists I talked to, he's like, basically there's 45 in the east, just for quick numbers, and 45 in the west, and Texas is a mixing ground. So you get the western species and the eastern species mixing in Texas, and we've got tremendous amount of oak diversity in Texas. I think we have nearly 60, depending on who you talk to, between 50 and 60 species of oaks just in Texas.
Well, and like you mentioned earlier, whenever we were discussing it, you just said they just happened to have discovered another species out west in West Texas that we thought disappeared a long time ago.
So when I was in Freer I was doing a black lace cactus survey. There's a botanist out there that was working with us, helping us look. He's a rare plant guy. His name's Michael Eason. And if you like wildflowers, y'all, he has a new book out there called The Wildflowers of Texas. It's one of the best photographic wildflower books ever. He's a botanist here in Texas. His name's Michael Eason. Anyway, he was telling me he's done a lot of work on oak trees out in West Texas in the Chisos Mountains. He's like, we just discovered a new species, or either a species they thought was extinct, in the Chisos Mountains. Really cool. So, so here we are in 2023 and still discovering new oaks out there.
Man, how cool is that?
Yeah.
Don't you know that was an exciting day?
Yeah, no kidding. So out of all that, there's 150 species to 200, depending on who you talk to, in Mexico alone. Mexico's probably the most diverse oak species in the whole world, because you've got probably around 450 of them worldwide that occur in across the globe, and Mexico has 150 of those just here south of it. In the cloud forest alone in Mexico, where the monarch butterflies go, some of the oak diversity down there is just striking, unbelievable, and different kinds. Some of them are 200 feet tall.
Oh my gosh.
Oaks. Yeah.
150 species in Mexico.
Yeah, that's what they say, around, I've seen some people say 160, like I said, lumpers and splitters,
Yeah.
And that's another thing about oaks too, because they hybridize. So oaks are wind pollinated. And so fascinating thing that I've just kind of noticed, and some friends of mine that study oaks as well too and pay attention in the woods, like the oaks are wind pollinated, but you got like the little male flowers on the same tree and the female flowers on the same tree. But a lot of them, like the little male flowers, the anthers, they'll bloom at a different time than the females, not at the same time. So it kind of makes sure that the trees are not being self-pollinated; they're being pollinated by somebody else.
Interesting.
Because the flowers on the trees aren't. I've noticed it; they're not maturing at the same time. But that's why diversity, and you have to have lots of oaks.
Yeah, so that's similar to like a pecan tree or something.
Yeah,
like
or
that.
fruit trees. The more you have the diversity and that blooming at different times, you're just going to get better production.
And boy, speaking of that, my allergies right now are telling me that there's lots of that going on.
Yes, the cedar's fixing to be happening. You remember last year, because I noticed the cedar trees the other day, they're getting the orange on them, so it's fixing
fantastic.
to be that time. So it might be what's giving you trouble right now, but I thought you cut that tree down in your yard, didn't you?
It survived every ice storm and every cold weather event we've had,
Yeah.
Cheesy. It's one of the 3 shade trees we have in the yard, so it's hard to
cut it down.
Hard to cut, yeah. Now, I will tell you one tree that has not fared very well, and that is our makes the orange fruits, the
persimmon?
Persimmon
Yes.
tree.
Mhm.
That poor little tree there has just taken a beating over the last few years, and I don't think it's going to survive another winter. It may be at the end of its reign.
It might not. Some of those trees, they get those 1-2 punches, and then they're out.
Yes, and so you talk about these oak trees and stuff. Well, everybody seems to call them either a red oak or a white oak and don't realize that there's so many different species that fall under those two categories.
And that's really important because they're adapted to different environments, different climates, different everything, So it's really important if you're going to a nursery and you live in the Blackland Prairie and you want a red oak, to not buy the one, that's not adapted to.
And see, we made that mistake. Well, back whenever my mom and dad built our house when I was like 12 or 13 years old, we planted some live oaks and we planted some what he called red oaks. I wish I could go back now that that I've gotten older and see what species of red oak it actually was.
Mm-hmm.
But there was one particular species of that red oak that he planted that just did not fare well out there in the black dirt. I mean, it didn't last probably 5-6 years, and both of them he had planted were gone. And somebody said cotton root rot will affect an oak tree out there in that area. Whether that's true or not, I don't know. But
I don't know either. But like I said, it's so much of them so many of the oak trees are adapted to. The pH is a big deal with them, So some of them need calcareous, more alkaline soils. Some of them need more acidic soils. Some of them are more adapted to the sandy land. Some of them more adapted to the west, especially here in Texas. So with all the different nurseries, you don't know what you're getting. So you really kind of need to know which species it is and some history of them. So like I said, out of those 400 to 500 species of oaks worldwide, we got 90 of them here in the continental United States. Those basically can be dropped into 3 different groups. Some people just say 2 groups, basically the white oaks, the red oaks, and the live oak. In the United States, you can basically say 40 of those 90 species are what we consider red oaks.
About half of them.
Yeah, and about 50 of those species, so around 90, are what we consider white oaks. So what's the difference between a red oak and a white oak? Because and they're very, very different. Number one thing which is really cool about red oaks is they are a New World species. They only occur in the Western Hemisphere, red oaks. So there's none in Russia or China or Siberia, or in Europe. They all have white oaks. So,
what do you account that to?
I don't know. I guess the same reason some of our mammals have evolved and adapted differently. Like our monkeys here in the New World have a prehensile tail. They can use their tail to hang upside down, whereas all the monkeys in the Old World, they can't do that. So I don't know. One of the reasons we got cool critters like armadillos, and possums, just the New World's a little bit different. So
right.
Different critters. But so red oaks are basically only found from Canada to Colombia. Really, that's about their range. And so all of Mexico and North America. Really cool. The acorns, one of the main difference of them that a lot of scientists look at is the acorns usually, when I say usually, this is general, there's always some outliers on there, but most of the time the acorns usually require 2 years to mature. That's basically, it takes 2 growing seasons for them to have acorns. They produce acorns what you would call biannually. The other main thing a lot of people go for that you're reading in key is red oaks have, so the top of the acorn, the little hat is called the cap or the cup. When you pull that cap or cup off, the underside of that cap will be very hairy. It'll be what they call tomentose. A lot, usually red or auburn colored, very fine hairs on the underside of the cap.
Now, so if you're looking for a tree to plant maybe in your yard where you don't want to mess with acorns every year, red oak is going to be your one of the groups of species you're going to look for in order to probably that you'd want to plant.
Yeah, it won't. It doesn't. It can produce mega crops when it does produce, but generally it'll produce every other year. Whereas white oaks, and we'll get to them, they produce annually. But even with that said, they still have up and down years. So just because one year and it produces annually, it produces a daylight load of acorns, it just seems like the next year, whether we have a good year or not, it just won't produce as much, So
it just takes a little while to build back up.
Yeah, there's roller coaster rides with it. Another thing about the red oaks, which is a biggie, it's probably the best one, is red oaks all have spine-tipped leaf margins.
Well, before we move on, Chancey, it's important to point out that the reason that some years it makes less acorns is because it's not going to be a cold winter.
Well, that's according to the old timers.
Yeah.
Them old timers are right most of the time.
Yeah. So that explains your roller coaster.
Yes.
No science needed there. No point wasting tax dollars on researching that, but
that's right. So the leaf margins all have like a bristle, like a spine tip bristle on the leaves. So think of a Shumard oak or a Texas oak. Think of the little spine. That's what they're talking about. Another thing too is nearly all red oaks, the underside of the leaves, have hair are little fine hairs underneath it. Some of it, it's solid hairs underneath it, like a southern red oak or a cherry bark oak. But other ones, the hairs are just in the, like if you look on the other side of the leaf, what they call the leaf axis, like the rachis and the veins on the, where the veins meet, where the midrib of the vein and the vein comes into the V. Sometimes the hair is just right there. It'll be a little tuft of hair growing right there. So that's one of the things too you can really tell, because oak trees, when they're young, a lot of times the leaves look very uncharacteristic of what an adult sunleaf looks like. So you got shade leaves and sun leaves, and so looking at different species, you got to kind of use these characteristics. So, okay, first red oak, white oak, you know, which species of red oak. You look at these hair patterns, all these different things to try to figure them out. Also with red oaks, the bark is different. In general, the bark is hard, black, and furrowed. As the tree ages, it'll get black and hard, furrowed and hard most of the time. So think of your, like you said, your little Buckley oak, the little Texas Spanish oak that grows in the hill country that's so beautiful in the fall. You know, when it gets big, it gets hard, dark, furrowed bark. So examples of some red oaks we mentioned was Shumard oak is one that occurs here, which is a big, beautiful red oak that gets very tall. It's a magnificent tree, does very well in the hill country. But, you go across I-45 and get around Buffalo, you know, and Centerville and stuff out there, you start picking up the southern red oak.
More acidic soils?
Yes, more acidic soils. And I have planted southern red oak even in my neck of the woods here, and I can't get them to survive, you know, planted them from acres. They'll come up, they'll grow. I don't know what it is, but they all die. So just, you know, they just don't do as well. Whereas Shumard oak will do very well on both the Blackland here and also like around where I live, you know, across the river a little bit.
Just well adapted for our area.
Very well adapted. They're a beautiful, magnificent tree. Have a big acorn too. Beautiful tree. Make wonderful fall colors as well.
And that all falls under red oak.
Those would be red oak. So other examples of red oaks in our area is blackjack oak. Blackjack oak is a type of red oak. Water oak, what all of locals around here call pin oak. And there is a true pin oak, a true tree called pin oak that's native to like northeast of here. And it's called, I think, Quercus palustris, I believe, pin oak. But water oak is what we call pin oak around here, just a common name, and that's Quercus nigris. Quercus nigra, that is a type of red oak as well. And if you look at the water oak leaf, believe it or not, if you look close, and even a blackjack leaf, you know, a blackjack oak kind of looks like a duck's foot. The leaf does. If you look, it'll have three little spine tip margins on that. And if you turn that leaf over where the veins meet the rachis, or that midrib, you'll see little tufts of hair, even on a water oak. And if you look closely, you'll see a little spine tip leaf mark.
All characteristics of a red oak species.
It's not as pronounced like of a Shumard or a pin oak or a Texas oak, but it's there. It still is.
And they all lose their leaves every winter?
Yes, yeah. All red oaks that I knew, some of them will hold them longer. You know, some trees you buy from nurseries and stuff, and they might be more adapted to East Texas or whatever, and you plant it, and some trees seem to hold their leaves longer than they should. Some trees will turn brown but never drop all their leaves. And now I don't know if that's a factor of the species or if that's just a factor of where you got it, and it's kind of not perfectly adapted, you know. So all these different trees, it's just like native grasses. They're different, what I'm going to call germplasms or ecotypes. Might be the same species, but it's more adapted. Like bur oak, for example. Bur oak is, occurs all the way from Minnesota to Texas, and it occurs in the east and the west. It's a very broad habitat. But when you go up and you look at the bur oaks in Minnesota, yeah, they're bur oaks, you can see, but they look very different than the bur oaks here in Texas. They just look a little bit different.
Fall under the same species.
Same species, no doubt. It's a bur oak. It's just like I was working in Mississippi last week. We have the same species, American elm. We got American elm here, everywhere. But you go to Mississippi, you can tell the leaves are the same, but the bark looks a little bit different. It's just they're just different. They're adapted to different climates. So it's real important if you're buying trees and nurseries and stuff like that to get one that's adapted to your area.
Almost like finches on Galapagos Island or something.
Yeah,
like that.
yeah. Mm-hmm.
Over years, they've had to change. I wonder if eventually there will be a different species.
Maybe so. Live long enough.
Yeah. Well, you mentioned that. Well, oaks is one of the oldest species of trees.
Oh, yeah, and long-lived.
To still be around,
yeah.
Basically. Like a lot of the things that have been around as long as them no longer exist anymore.
Yeah. Well, heck, just the giant, the world or state record live oak. It might be the world record live oak. I'm not sure. Down in Rockport at Goose Island, I think they say that thing's over 1,000 years old.
Isn't that something?
I don't know if they've ever, taken a core of it to check it. I don't know, but I know they estimate it to be that old. And when you look at it, you're like, yeah, I can see that being 1,000 years old. So
I tell you what, you better be careful what you do around that tree because you don't want to take that sucker. Be the guy that takes that sucker out.
Oh yeah, that boy, isn't that the truth?
It seems like I remember back maybe 10, 15, 20 years ago, there was an old live oak, I think it was, down around Belton somewhere, and it was like a super old tree like that. And somebody, I think, had accidentally not cleaned out their tank or something and used one of those like ground sterilizer chemicals inside of that deal, and it got down there on the roots of that tree.
Oh man!
And they tried everything to save it, like as far as like cleaning, like digging soil out and replacing soil, trying to save that tree. And just that one mistake took out hundreds of years old tree.
Yeah, and they can't be replaced, man. I mean, that's actually really sad. I mean, I love trees, I do, and you see those old ones, and so that's why it concerns me to see some of these old beautiful trees not regenerating.
Well, I mean, look, it goes all the way back to the Vikings making their ships out of oak trees.
Yeah,
that's how long those things have been of importance around here. I mean, like. They've been here since the beginning of time.
Yeah, I think even during the Revolutionary War and maybe even the Civil War, I mean, our white oak, Quercus alba, it was the go-to tree for ship holes and stuff because it was so strong and durable. I mean, even in Europe wanted our Quercus alba because it was such an important tree. So
I mean, look at the good barbecue you can make with oak wood.
Heck yeah, dang right.
But
I love cooking on post oak.
I didn't mean to get distracted there, but that's the characteristics of what a red oak is. Mm-hmm. And then you move over to the other side of the spectrum, and you got the white oak.
Got the white oaks, what we consider white oaks, and so let's just in North America, there's probably about 50 white oak species.
That's so odd that it's about half and half.
Yeah, probably about 50. And like I said, there's white oaks in the west, there's white oaks in the east. Different species. So white oaks, and like I said, we're going to lump them.
Well, to
live
summarize,
oaks occur in white oak. We're going to say live oaks are part of the white oaks. The flora of North America treats live oaks as white oaks.
To summarize the red oaks, you got hard bark.
Yeah,
you got
acorns mature biannually.
They're biannual acorns. You got the points on the end of the leaves.
Yeah, fur or hair on the underside of the cap, and usually hair on the underside of the leaf. And red oaks have more tannins and resins in them, so they usually have better fall color, or they have more oranges and reds fall colors, whereas white oaks generally have more yellows fall color. And from what I've read, their tannins and resins also go into the acorns, and so as a rule, it seems like when it comes to wildlife relishing certain types of oaks, it seems like they like the white oaks better just because they don't have to deal with all the tannins and resins. Not that they won't eat the red oaks. They will, no doubt about it. But I've even heard...
They prefer them a little less.
Yeah, I would say. But, and they're falling at different times, so it's important to have a mixture of both. But that's just what I've read, some biology on the wildlife aspect. And I've even heard the Indians that used to make flour out of them, the white oaks make a little bit better flour because of that resin. So, taste, it matters, even to animals.
Interesting. I didn't know that they use that for flour.
Yeah, it's historically, I think they would grind. I think it's like labor intensive, but it can be done, and they are edible. And I've eaten it. I don't know if you've ever ate acorn.
You know what? I never have.
Awful. Yeah.
Like real bitter, I'm assuming?
Yeah, bitter. I've eaten, the only one I ever ate was a post oak, and it was not that good, So, and post oaks is a type of white oak. So there you go. So some characteristics of white oaks is acorns usually produce annually. They'll usually have acorns once a year. Now, I'm not saying every year is going to be a bumper crop. They have good years and they have bad years. The cap is smooth underneath. The little hat has no hairs underneath. The leaves are without bristle tips. Now, sometimes you might have what I call a little tit, or a little, like a little tit at the end of it, like on a white oak. But it's not a bristle. It's not a spine-tip bristle. And then the bark is generally white and scaly. As the tree gets older and mature, a lot of times it'll be scaly. It's usually not as dense. That's the white oak. So, and white oaks are more geographically distributed. So there's lots of white oaks in Europe, everywhere in the whole world.
It's kind of, before we get off that subject, I guess, it's kind of a good time to mention that a red oak, whenever the acorns fall and it sprouts.
Yes, that's another thing about their strategy. In general, most of the time, when white oaks will fall from the tree in the fall, and they will germinate. They will sprout. They'll put a root and a shoot down in the fall, and then they'll overwinter, and then they'll come back. Whereas red oaks, most of them, in general, they'll fall in the fall and get on the ground, but then they overwinter. They won't sprout until spring.
But they have to be covered up by something.
They need to be sober because that's one of the problems. We're talking about regeneration. We're going to talk about disturbance. Oaks love sunlight. They are sun species. They cannot tolerate shade. They are shade intolerant. All of them have varying degrees of the amount, but in general, they need disturbance, something that creates sunlight. So then that's important, but also desiccation. The acorn will dry out fast, and the longer the acorn sits on the ground, the more susceptible it is to weevil infestation. So you want the acorn to hit the ground pretty fast, or better yet, get it off the acorn right when it starts loosening from the cap, and go plant it. That's the best time to plant them. The longer it sits on the ground, the more susceptible to weevils they are, and the quicker they desiccate. And then in our falls, we get some 80, 90 degree days in falls, and if it's a dry fall, unless a squirrel buries that acorn, or if you got a lot of, like a good functioning forest ecosystem and functioning detritus and leaf litter layer, a lot of times and I've seen it firsthand in East Texas, the acorn will fall and get good seed soil contact and then be covered up with leaves, and that's enough to insulate it and germinate it.
That works great for that.
Yeah, it works great. Insulation is perfect. But you look at these landscapes here that don't have that functioning system, the detritus, the organic layer down there, they're just these beautiful, they look like parks, beautiful Bermuda fields are beautiful, and it's just all these post oaks. There's no regeneration there, and when those trees are gone, they're gone.
So wild hogs probably help with the regeneration in the way that they root around and eat some, but then they cover others up.
They do, and I will say that, when I was working in Louisiana extensively, I was really studying, just self-teaching myself oaks over there, and, feral hogs got a bad rap all the time, and I hated feral hogs too, but they got a bad rap about eating everything. They just eat everything. Well, I went over there, and I worked for years, and I studied, and I watched. Those areas where those hogs, they were eating 70% of it, but they were planting a lot too. I could go and look at some of those roots and come back the year, and those were oaks germinating there. So I'm not giving hogs kudos. I'm just saying, they don't eat everyone. They don't eat everyone. And you think about it, the true Eurasian wild boar, it developed in the forest of Eurasia and Europe and Germany and all that stuff, and that's some of the prettiest oak forest ecosystems there is,
They probably helped with that a little bit.
Yeah, and but now we got feral hogs that have way more babies, well, that's a whole nother topic. So, they outcompete and out-reproduce than like the native Eurasian wild boar that just had one litter a year.
Oh, that was ideal.
Yeah. So something about hogs and acorns and oak trees, I guess. But I guess
that old saying, even the blind hog finds an acorn every once in a while.
Yeah. And I think even like in Europe, they use those hogs to hunt truffles or something. I've read, or I don't know, something dealing with the oak tree roots and some type of fungus or mushroom, and they would use hogs to help dig them up. This goes back to over in France maybe or something. I'll have to look it up. I don't know the details of it. But they were hunting something, using trained hogs to find something growing in oak roots. But so we mentioned the disturbance, and that's key, and that's something we want to talk about.
Did we cover all the characteristics of white oaks?
I think so. Scaly bark, leaves without bristle tips. Yeah. So those are things, there's basically 50 of them, North American. So examples of white oaks that occur around here is post oak. Number one, everybody's familiar with a post oak. It's a type of white oak. I will say post oak is an exception, like I said, in general. Well, post oak, it's called Quercus stellata. And the reason it's called stellata is on the underside of a post oak leaf, it actually does have hairs. But they're stellate means star shape. If you look on, they're like little tiny hairs. Nearly all the red oak's hairs underneath are always brown. These are white or very thin or very light colored on a post oak. If you look at them with like a 10x magnifying glass, you can see them. They're little star-shaped hairs.
Well, so now that's pretty cool.
Yeah, and there's different species of post oak too. Like you got a bottomland post oak. You get in East Texas that you got a beautiful post oak, and there are little intricacies and differences in them. And then so that's a white oak that occurs here. And then if you go east a little bit, you have the true white oak called Quercus alba, and that's a beautiful tree. You look at it, I love that tree. And I actually planted a bunch of acorns from East Texas I got on my place here in Hanover, and I planted them, I guess, back in 2015. They're doing real well. So like I said, I wanted to try them out, and they're doing pretty good, so I'm happy about that. Like I've got one that's probably 8 foot tall. It was just a really good tree, and it's only planted in 2016. So
man.
Doing pretty good, yeah. I just found a sweet spot that it liked. So that's part of it on oaks. So all of some other examples of white oaks. You know, you got what's like a Monterey oak. That's a type of white oak, if you're familiar with that. There's, like I said, most of your stuff out in West Texas, a lot of those in the Chisos Mountains, there's mixtures of, you know, white oaks and red oaks all within there. So I guess get back to disturbance. So this is what we was talking about.
And this is one of the things that's really a challenge that oak trees in general are facing.
Yes. So we've taken out the system, and that's what got us on this talk, because we're talking about all the ice and all this stuff. Well, if you think about it, as bad and as of an eyesore it was, and it looks really bad to us, that ice storm probably helped oaks as far as oak regeneration, because oaks need disturbance. They need sunlight. Well, historically, what did that? They are fire-maintained species, they are drought-maintained species, and they are grazing-maintained species. Those were the three disturbances that occurred. And basically the same disturbances that formed the prairie, and those same natural factors, fire, grazing, and drought, those are the big ones. Our oak trees are adapted to it. And because of that disturbance and periodic disturbance, you have what I call shade-tolerant species and shade-intolerant species. In general, oaks and pecans, even hickories, are shade-intolerant. Most of your shade-intolerant stuff has big nuts, or big acorns, you know. And then a lot of your shade-tolerant stuff, which is like your hackberries, cedar elm to some extent, winged elm, yaupon, eastern red cedar, you know, you can see these plants growing up underneath in the shade, and they seem to do just fine.
Well, now, like you mentioned before, evidence of these oak trees basically like needing space in order to grow would be if you look at the really old ones and how branched out they are, and how you could tell they didn't grow up with a lot of competition.
Yeah,
they had plenty of room to grow, where it wasn't like today's thickets.
Yeah, like the trees will just, they'll tell you, if you pay attention how the growth form them, they'll tell you what it used to look like. So you can go in what you consider pristine, nice bottomland hardwoods down here, and you see some of those old giant trees. They got trees really down low. Now that limb's really way down low, and big limbs. Now that limb may be dead because
it's gotten so thick.
It's got so thick, you know, and that's what's happening in the Blackland Prairie right now with our bottomlands. They're growing up in hackberry, shade tolerant, and cedar elm, and then a lot of these places aren't being grazed, or they were isolated from flood, so you can't graze them. Fire doesn't
you
get
couldn't
in there
put a
anymore.
fence in a
Couldn't put
bottom.
A fence in there, know? And so they're being choked up, and those oak trees are not regenerating. That's number one. What was happening with the Durando?
No fire.
In my opinion, not disturbance. Now, flood could be a form of disturbance, you know, and that can help clear stuff out. But the problem is those little fast growths, like the tortoise and the hare, you know, the oak is the tortoise. It puts a root down, whereas like the hackberries and the
well, we've also
cedar
cut
elms,
back on the flooding with the dams and
yes, it doesn't flood them out like we talked about before. Historically, Little River, it would have gotten out, you know, at least twice a year, once in the spring, once in the fall, you know. So all that happening, but this ice storm, believe it or not, when I'm looking at my landscape and yeah, it looks terrible, it helped in regeneration because it basically knocked the top third of all these canopies off of these trees around here and put them on the ground. And now those limbs are there, you know, unless you clean them up, fire will eventually take care of them, or they will rot. One of the two, maybe not fire anymore, but historically it would have. Well, now those limbs are on the ground, and if you got a deer problem, those little oak trees are going to be able to fall in there. It's got a little nice, what I call a little nurse area for our acorn to sprout. And not only that, it's kind of protected. A deer can't get in there to eat, and the light is enough, you know. So it's going, and if there was an oak tree that's sitting there that wasn't doing very well because it needed to be what I call released, that top being knocked out there will give it, you know, open these little light gaps and let it go.
Well, and so even like if you look at a lot of these old, what are now old fence lines where fences were built, 100 years ago, I guess.
Yeah.
And you've got all of these like hackberries, and you got these elms, and you got these cedars, all these like fast growing trees that birds crapped out on the fence at one point, I guess. You don't see any oaks growing there.
No.
But then again, like you said, now that all those old trees are starting to die and rot, now you're starting to see some oaks come up. Like maybe where the squirrels have carried nuts in and the trees have fell on them.
Detritus, so it's a system, and generally the system's created to fix itself. It will fix itself now. The problem is it may not be within our lifetime, you know, our generation. It will eventually fix itself.
I've outlived a few hackberries, but I ain't outlived many oaks.
That's true, you know, so it's that system that follows. But the key in maintaining and managing that system is put those systems in place that promote some type of disturbance. So light is a big one. Fire, grazing are the big ones for Milam
Well,
County.
because you got to go back to the oak itself. It's growing a root first.
Yes.
Growing a root first, while your cedars, they're dropping a seed, and them suckers are growing straight up.
Their growth strategies get high, and they can tolerate shade too. And not only that, their roots are way shallower rooted, so they're also, those shallow rooted tree, they're also taking moisture, from other trees and grass as well. So, but the good thing about it is oak gets sprouted, and it's down there. Hoof action from a cattle, it might take the top out, but it ain't going to kill that oak. The oak's going to come back. Whereas little baby hackberries and little baby elms that are an inch or two tall, hoof action will go in there and they'll kill that, just by hoof action from grazing.
They just don't have the root to take it.
They don't have the root to take it. But you take that out and fire too, run through there, man. They're done when they're that little. So taking that out of the system creates these overshaded landscapes, and then it gets so bad that it's at a level that fire and grazing can't fix it, almost. So you almost have to do mechanical or something in there to kind of get it back to,
which is where like a lot of that mulching and stuff is kind of
to
handy
get it
once
into
again.
a system that's workable again. And so when you get in those areas where it's that thick and that much shade tolerant, the only thing that's reproducing in there is the shade tolerant plants. Yes, the acorns fall, they might germinate, but they sit there and sit there and sit there. And so, a disturbance like this that totally knocks out some stuff, it'll help, to create these light gaps, and it'll help some regeneration. Also, what I'm noticing too, like just on my creek alone that was so incised and starting to cut, from past land use changes, the entire canopy of these trees is in that creek now, tons of it. So it's slowing water down. It's slowing, of course it's going to rot and take some time and everything, but it's slowing the water down considerably. It's also raising the stream bed.
Yeah, it was
because the sediment's going to get trapped in instead of. So you're also basically it's the system fixing itself.
It was basically nature creating beaver dams.
Yeah, pretty much, in my opinion. So I actually think that the winter storm is helping the creek. And it's definitely going to help oak regeneration. It's a sore to our eyes. We like everything to look like a park, but I think the systems is just basically the disturbance. It's the system just fixing itself, and also the system that created it. All that stuff around it's just how it functions.
Absolutely. And so, a deeper rooted tree is going to fare a whole lot better too, in what that ice and cold weather actually was too. I mean, those soft wooded trees, they really, I don't think they'll ever recover from that.
Yeah, well, I had a lot of hackberries that were really big that just fell over.
Yeah,
they just, like, the whole tree uprooted it,
Yeah, they literally didn't fare at all.
No. Limbs everywhere on those cotton picking things.
Elms, too.
Yeah. Well, I'll tell you, the water oaks at my house, I love water oaks. They're pretty trees, but I got into where I cussed them pretty bad for the last month because I've been cleaning up mostly those in the top. So now I kind of consider them a glorified, pretty blackjack oak. It's kind of where I'm at on those.
Yeah, it's and so you look at all those things and how they grow their roots first and all that. I guess that's one of the main reasons, that they've done so well over time, and all with fire and all those things that would come through and naturally take care of all the weaker competition, and they would fare so well.
Yeah.
And now we've done away with that.
Yeah, we take those out of the system. That's where we're losing a lot. And depending on the tree, like I said, Mexico's facing a lot of problems with extinction on a lot of the species. And they got some of the coolest oak trees in the world. Like some oak trees down there, the acorn's as big as a baseball. Some of them, the acorn looks like a jalapeno pepper. It's long and skinny. Amazing stuff. And like I said, I think it's the same thing holds true. What's happening down there is happening here. It's just, different systems. Some are adapted, but they need disturbance, and taking that out is why we're not getting a lot of the regeneration that we should be, in my opinion, which can be fixed relatively easy.
So, I guess we could help that along by planting the trees ourselves.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And
then putting that system in place that maintained it, burn it every now and then,
Is there some important things for planting oak trees? I know you do it a lot.
Yeah, best thing to do if you're going to I plant most of them by acorns,
And first off, like you said, pick the right species for your area.
Pick the right species. If it's growing native around your area, just go find that tree that you want that's producing a lot. Like I go around here looking all the time. Oh, there's a bur oak that's native. There's a Durand oak that's native. There's a Shumard oak. There's a really beautiful population of Shumard oaks on Tyson Creek around Macefield, and a big, beautiful ones. Go pick them. Don't let the acorn sit on the ground long. If you can gather it off the tree, the better. Get the acorn and pull it off the tree. right when it starts wanting to come out of its cap pretty easily.
That's perfect
where
timing.
where it doesn't have to pry it out. It kind of, you just barely touch it and twist and it just falls out. That's the best time to get them. And man, put them right in the ground. The sooner the better. But if you can't, you can put them in the refrigerator and kind of hold them off, or even put them in soil, or put them in a big tub, cover them, and just plant them just like a squirrel, the depth of an acre. Or even you can leave the apex of the acorn sticking out just a little bit, cover it with hay, check on it every now and then, and as soon as you see that root, because you'll see the shoot start coming out of that acorn, as soon as you do that, take and go plant it. And plant it just like a squirrel, about the depth of an acorn. Lay it on its side, plant it on there, cover it up. If you got some type of detritus, some type of old hay or leaves or something around there, put that on top of it, and that's all it takes.
That helps hold moisture
Yeah.
and protect it from other things as well.
Yeah, and I've planted thousands of them in a day. It's a little harder now because it involves getting up and getting down, but they even make a little acorn planter, I think, that you can just poke in the ground and drop an acorn there, which is pretty good. And I'm thinking about buying one, to be honest with you. But that's a good thing. That's one way to just go planting them. And another thing, planting them too, I actually think, in my opinion, if you're going to buy potted plants, or if you're going to put them in plants and grow them for a little while and see which one's good, I think fall planting them, like out of a tub.
That is the best time.
October, November. Yeah, October, November. And this is for two reasons, in my opinion. For one, forever and ever and ever, the history and everybody was planting in February. And it still works. I've planted in February and it works. But the thing about it is, if you plant in February, you just shocked that tree, for one. You took it out of whatever it was growing in, or you dug it up somewhere, and then you put it somewhere. And it's right now, so it's got to start growing roots immediately. And it's also fixing to have to start growing shoots immediately, because in February, the sun's coming on, spring is coming on, things are getting ready, sap's going up into those plants. And so basically that plant has to both grow roots and shoots at the same time after being shocked like crazy. So it might require some TLC, a little bit more. So you plant it in your yard, you probably get by with it, but you better mulch it, you better water it, you better take good care of it. Whereas in the fall planting, plants grow roots in the wintertime, no shoots. But in the fall, that plant's going dormant. You get it in the ground in October, November, even if you shocked it, it's still going to grow roots all winter long, but it's not having to use that extra energy to also grow shoots. Got 4 or 5 months, or 3 months for sure, that it can grow roots and not have to worry about shoots. And then when spring gets here, it's got some roots established and it's ready to take off.
And at the very minimal, you've at least given more time for like root to soil contact.
Yes.
Like the soil has time to run down around the roots, and kind of make better contact with the roots. And like you said, they grow roots all winter. So by the time the spring comes around and it's time to go, well, they'll be better rooted and ready for the spring.
Yes, I think that they'll require less maintenance. Not that, when you plant a tree, you better think about taking care of it for 2 years, for sure, if you want it not to die, because, droughts happen in Texas.
In that case, I wonder if there's anything good to put around a tree when you do plant it that's better.
Mulch.
But I'm talking about in the actual hole. I wonder if like if some kind of like a phosphorus-rich thing, like
I've
manure
heard there's some
or something.
stuff to plant. Yeah, root stimulator growth is a big one.
That's just a high phosphorus product.
I always, if I take a tree out of a pot, I take my knife and I cut the daylights out of the roots.
Well, even if you transplant vegetables, that's a good idea to kind of rough the roots up a little bit.
Sure.
So to help with the root, so that they're not growing in a constant ball.
Yeah, that's right.
Kind of helps them grow out instead of in the same little ball shape that they've been trained in. Mm-hmm. True or not, I don't know, but that's what
I think it helps. And speaking of vegetables,
oh man, speaking of vegetables, man, it's gardening time here in Central Texas, isn't it?
Yes, it is.
Man, we just this past week downtown, they had the Master Gardeners had a plant sale just yesterday actually, and man, I tell you what, if you don't do one of those in your town, if you have a Master Gardeners association or group that doesn't host a plant sale every spring, you should probably consider it.
Yes.
Because man, that was probably the biggest thing to hit downtown all year. I mean, it was hundreds of cars down there at that deal. Everybody going to pick up plants that people have been growing in their greenhouses and stuff all year. Really good event.
Yeah, I'm glad to see that too. I'm glad to see people getting out and about in the garden in the springtime. It's just, garden's fun. I think it's just something innate in us, that makes us want to get out there. Something nice about growing your own food too. I love it. So
yeah, and even here at the feed store, we've been busy with selling plants and all. So yes, indeed, spring has sprung, Chancey, and people, like I said, people have been coming in here wanting garden plants after garden plants after garden plants, and whenever they come in and they have a question like that I should know the answer to, and I obviously don't, I say, you know what? There's a guy who I'm going to call.
Yes.
And he's a guy we've known a long time. And his name is actually Dr. Frank Summers, who is a local living legend when it comes to gardening around here.
Absolutely, he is.
Yeah,
we're lucky enough to have him on the line this morning.
We are, and so Frank is joining us over this fancy thing we have now called technology. Frank, how's it going today, my friend?
It's going good, but that introduction was way laying it on too heavy. What do you want, Brad?
You to keep buying feed from me, Frank.
Okay. We can probably work that out.
Hot dog, but yeah, hey, spring has sprung around here, man, and it's been 85 degrees and it's been 20 degrees, but I think the 20-degree days are about over with. So where are we at in the gardening world right now?
Well, I hope you're right about those 20-degree days, but you know what the old-timers say, Easter spell is still in front of us, and that's in April. So, I'd be a little bit touchy about what I was going to plant right away. You're right. Spring has sprung. I've been watching the trees and happened to go down to Columbus yesterday, and, boy, they're just blooming all over, wildflowers everywhere, and it's really spring is here, and people will probably get that itch. But I'd say it's way too early for tomatoes and peppers unless you can cover them and protect them in case Mr. Frost decides to visit us again.
We know frosts are good for the feed store business, Frank, because the people have bought a lot of peppers already. I probably should have sold them some mulch, too.
Yeah, well, if they can cover them with a aluminum can, anything, just give them a little bit of cover. As long as it doesn't get much below 30 degrees, they may make it. The ground naturally stores some heat, and that container will help control it. I know back last year I got my cabbage through the hard spell with syrup tubs, big, well, I guess the lip tubs, I guess you call them, and they did a good job.
No, those are a good thing, and a lot of those are dark colored too, so they kind of probably absorb a little more sunlight. And so, like you mentioned old timers, and they say that if it thunders at the beginning of February, that means a freeze in April. And boy, it thundered in the beginning of February this year.
Yeah, well, you can't live by wives' tale. There's a lot of them out there. A lot of people like to plant by the moon. And I've actually done some things by the moon and not by the moon and really haven't been able to tell a whole lot of difference. But, if the moon can move oceans, I imagine it can have effect on other things. But right now, it's not too late to put in a few potatoes, which I'm going to do this afternoon. I was given some seed potatoes, and I'm going to go ahead and not waste them. I may not make as good a potato crop, but all your cold crops now, I'm sure, Brad, you got some broccoli and some cauliflower and cabbage and things like that on hand. Still plenty of time to get those in the ground.
Oh, there is still plenty of time for those winter crops.
Yep, but it needs to happen now. Don't put it off. They can stand, cabbage can stand like 26, 27, depending again. Broccoli is a little more sensitive, but if you cover them, they do real well. Like I say, mine survived. What did it get down to, 13?
It did, yes. And they fared pretty well through that, huh?
Oh, I ate cabbage last night.
Hey, what about onions?
Onions? I always like to get my onions in the ground back in November or December, but it didn't seem like there were any around this year. And they're probably not going to bulb as big, not going to do as well. Onions biennial. In other words, it really takes 2 years supposedly to go ahead and go to seed. And with the weather being cold and hot, that sometimes confuses the onions, and they don't do quite as well. So you're really better off planting them earlier in the year. But, if you want to plant some onions, you'll certainly wind up with some green ones if you don't wind up with any large bulb-type onions.
And the question's been asked on those 1015 varieties. Does that mean you're supposed to plant the seed on 1015?
Correct.
October 15th?
That is the date. October 15th is when you're supposed to plant the seed. And I don't know if you guys actually listened to my horticultural hotline show last Saturday or yesterday, but I'm getting around and I'm not trying to take business away from you at all here. I know you guys in the feed store.
It's okay, Frank. I can edit it.
Well, my thing is I really like to see, I'm going to start seeding a lot more stuff myself and growing my own transplant. Bonnie Seeds grows some great plants, but they have really capitalized on the market. And there's a lot of varieties out there, old timers like me, look for, and you can't find at any of the box stores or nurseries or anywhere, because most of them now, it's much easier to buy Bonnies or get Bonnie's plants because I know how they play the game. What you sell, you pay for. What you don't sell, you don't pay for, which is a good deal for the sellers, certainly. But there's things out there like Flora America, fantastic, super fantastic, Spring Giant, tomato varieties that the seed is still available.
And those are heirlooms, Frank, or heirlooms?
No, they're just old hybrid varieties that are still around. I think there's some commercial farmers that are still growing Flora America. It was a commercial tomato for a long time. It's a really good, healthy plant, large large tomatoes, good shipper.
While you're on the topic, what are some of the better tomato varieties? Everybody wants Celebrity. I don't know if that's the best, or how you determine exactly what tomatoes that a person should plant in our area.
Well, it all depends on what you want to do with them. And for one thing, of course, the Roma and some of the paste tomatoes are good if you're going to be making ketchup and sauces and that kind of stuff. I personally, my choice is Celebrity's one of them. And one of the reasons you see these certain varieties everywhere, and that's all you can get, Early Girl, Celebrity, some of those that are just always on the market, basically. A lot of people know them and they use them. And Celebrity is certainly a good plant. It's called a semi-determinate. If you can keep it alive through the summer, it'll produce once it gets too hot, it quits, but it'll pick up again in the fall. And it's a really good plant for most home gardeners. Of course, Early Girl is also a good one that they call it Early Girl, but I've had a lot of other tomatoes like Homestead and Porter's produce earlier. But I tell you, I'm going to be planting Celebrity this year. I'm going to be planting some Early Girl. I'm going to be planting some Big Beef. That is a variety. It's a big kind of a beefsteak like tomato. It's a sandwich tomato, I would say. It's one of those that'll cover the whole burger patty. You just one slice of it.
Yes.
Those are my top picks. And of course, there's Better Boy, Big Boy. The only thing you want to be sure of is that you buy something that is nematode, verticillium, and fusarium resistant. Exactly.
Which varieties are resistant to that? The ones you mentioned?
Yeah. Those are all VFN. And the nematode V, verticillium, fusarium, wilt, and nematodes. And, those are all, most anything you get on the market today that's a hybrid will have those traits. Some of them, matter of fact, may even have a few more traits. There's a mosaic virus out there, and there's some tomato varieties, which I don't know what they are right now. They mention that they have a tolerance, or they're not immune to it, but they might tolerate it better than some of the other plants.
Yeah, and so when you plant tomatoes, Frank, is there any good practices?
Yeah.
Like something that's good to do, like when you plant them, like maybe a certain type of fertilizer, something that...
No. Number one, I don't ever put any fertilizer in the hole with anything, and I don't think anybody else should. People tend to overdo it. If a little bit's good, a lot more will do a lot better. Not necessarily true. I normally lay my fertilizer down in the row when I'm bedding up. If you don't do that, you can come back later and side dress. But and I'll tell you who taught me this years ago was a gentleman by the name of Perry Litke. He was famous in the Rockdale area as a truck gardener and a tomato grower. And basically, if that stem, you don't want to take the growing point out of the tomato, but all those lower leaves and everything. If I've got a 8-inch or a 6-inch tall plant, there'll be about 2 inches of it out of the ground when I get done. If I got an 8-inch tall plant, there'll be about 2 inches out of it when I get done.
Oh, you planted that deep?
Leaves. Yes, sir. Because that whole that whole stem will root. And the stronger the root system, the better off you are.
That's a great tip.
So what did you say? You plant 2/3 of it roughly?
Pretty much. Yeah. You can't cover the top leaves, of course, but you can go ahead and plant them a lot deeper than. In other words, they've got that little 6-inch cup or 4-inch cup, and people just barely cover the dirt, and plant them that deep. No, go all the way down as deep as you can. I usually leave the growing point and the next 2, maybe 3 sets of leaves, and that's it.
Well,
usually it's only 2 though.
Like you said, with the risk of possibly a late freeze or something coming in a week or two, well, if you plant it that deep, the heat from the ground will, help insulate it a little bit too, keep it a little bit warmer.
You're exactly right. You must have been an old ag teacher or something.
No, I've been listening to the Horticulture Hotline. I learned all this stuff over the years.
I know
Frank.
better than that.
Yes, sir.
As far as planting tomatoes, I've got about I'm going to be putting in about 120 plants this year, and I'm not going to put those in probably till the very last week of March.
120?
Oh yeah.
Well, man, I'm not even going to plant a garden, Frank. I'm just going to get my stuff from you, since you clearly know way better than me what you're doing anyway.
Well, we had a really bumper crop last year with the current conditions of the economy. I decided that I hadn't planted in a long time a large garden, and I planted a large garden, and of course, mostly on new ground because I've got a lot of places to plant. And boy, I hit a home run. I've got some sisters that love tomatoes. I love tomatoes. I'll eat a tomato, fresh tomato, morning, noon, and night, and then maybe one for dessert. Kind of sometimes scare me if I'm not careful. But that being said, I love them. You can't beat a homegrown tomato. And I grow that many because I found a market or two last year, and I think some people are looking forward to buying some tomatoes, fresh tomatoes, homegrown this year, locally.
Well, boy, between tomatoes and the eggs, I mean, you can't grow enough of that stuff yourself anymore now.
That's true.
And what about strawberries, Frank? Some people ask about growing strawberries. Does it take sandy land to do that, or will they grow just about anywhere?
Strawberries will do all right. The thing about strawberries are you have a couple of different kinds. You have the day neutral varieties and then the June bearing varieties. Here in Milam County, probably the best varieties are the June bearing varieties. One of the top strawberry varieties, and I grew them for years when I had my boys at home, because we all like strawberries.
Oh, very good.
We always grew Sequoia. It's not a good shipper because you need to pick it and either freeze it or eat it. Don't leave it in the fridge for 2 or 3 days because it'll go soft on you. But they have they taste like strawberries.
Like what a strawberry is supposed to taste like.
Yeah. Like they tasted like when you were a kid. Mm-hmm. I'm just telling you. So that the June bearing plants need to go in the ground sometime in October or November, so they can winter and do the whole thing and go through their cycle and start bearing. They call them June bearing, but they start bearing usually around April. Depends on the weather again.
So they won't freeze, Frank, over the winter?
Well, they will, but again, they're very easy you just cover them with some hay or any kind of mulch or anything that you can spread back later on, because that growing point of a strawberry is so low to the ground, the crown as they call it, is so low to the ground that it really takes a hard freeze to take them out, because again, we talked about that ground heat earlier. If it's stored up, it's going to keep them nice and warm, and just throwing a little thin mulch of hay over the top, you're good to go.
Okay, that's good.
Interesting.
That's good to note. And is there any other kind of things that we need to be doing right now that's important to get done here before it gets too hot?
Well, certainly you want to get your garden ready so you can go in, because if we get into a May situation or a rainy situation in May like we have in some years, and you don't have your stuff planted, you don't want to be mudding it in, because that's going to compact the ground, and it's just not really a good way to plant. But there's a lot of things like you were mentioning that could go in the ground. You can see turnips, beets, carrots, a lot of those things right now can go on in the ground seed-wise, and they'll come up. And, of course, corn. We're past the real corn planting date. I think a lot of farmers like to get in the end of February, first part of March, to be planting. And now's a good time to go ahead and plant your corn. As I say, whatever the weather's going to do, if it stays warm and we have those 80-degree days, you can plant your peppers today. But I'm not going to take that chance.
If we had a crystal ball, huh?
Yeah, we'd all be rich, wouldn't we?
I mean, buddy, it is. So what about things, Frank, like watermelons? A little too early for that? Okra?
Yeah, watermelon, okra.
A little too early for that, I should say.
I never plant my okra till May. Okra's like cotton. Into April, 1st of May, it likes hot weather. It really does like hot weather. I had good luck with my okra last year, planted it in May, and was starting to cut my first okra about mid-June to the end of June. You can try and start it earlier. One of the secret, people say, well, okra's so hard to get up. I've got a little secret about okra. If you plant ice cubes, you'll get your okra up. And what I mean by that is get you an old ice tray that makes ice cube you stick in your freezer.
Mm-hmm.
Put you 1 or 2 okra seeds in each. I usually put 2 and have to go in and thin them later. In each one of those, fill it with water, freeze it, and then plant the ice cube, and your okra will come up.
That is ingenious.
You were joking me.
No, that's an old trick I learned years and years ago because it scarifies the seed. It helps soften the seed, and it's sitting in water. When that ice cube melts, it's sitting right there in water, whether you're in sand, clay, whatever. It starts off right away with that water being right there.
Being as though it's a dicot, you can't plant it too deep, huh?
Well, you really don't want to plant any dicot too deep. Corn, you can probably get away with it on, and it's chancy. That's monocot, right, Chancy?
Yes, sir. I believe all grasses are. Yep.
I remember having conversations with him when he was a kid, monocot and dicot.
Yeah, when I first took botany at Temple College, man. I was like, I was talking to Frank forever. I was so excited to tell him all the stuff I was learning about plants.
Yeah.
See, Frank, me and Chancey just got through doing a whole little segment on oak trees and the importance of oak trees, and we said we better not call Frank in for this because he's going to see through all our lies. We didn't want somebody we didn't want anybody intelligent on this on that conversation with us, Frank.
My rule, I've been asked a lot about trees lately, and I'll tell you, Brad, it's my opinion, sit and wait. A lot of them were damaged. I've looked at some trees that don't look good. Our live oaks really look bad right now, but remember, February is the start of the annual leaf drop for live oaks in our area. So, if it's losing leaves or this kind of thing, give it till May, into May, June, and then make a decision on whether or not you think it's in trouble.
Well, and even Chancey mentioned, Frank, while we have you, that this could turn out to be a good thing for the oaks because it removed a lot of that sunshade, a lot of the canopy coverage.
For regeneration,
smarter than he looked. Chancey's a whole lot smarter than he looked. But that's true. That's true. People talk to me about trees and all this stuff, taking care of them, and I'm blessed to live in a county where we've got a lot of natural forest, post oak forest, and actually in the post oak savanna with cedars and all kinds of trees. And I see trees every day that the only person that's ever taken care of them is Mother Nature and God.
Mm-hmm.
So.
Well, and now, Frank, we've limited that where Mother Nature can't even really take care of it the way it used to with fire and whatever else not.
True, but that's one of the things that I made a comment on. God was just pruning trees with that ice storm.
Yeah, see, Frank, so I make a comment like that, and you brag on how smart Chancey is, and I say something smart and nothing. Crickets. Crickets, Frank.
You're welcome. Not a problem.
Appreciate it, bud. I'll just sit here quietly and listen to you and Chancey talk for the rest of the time.
Anytime.
But is that about it, Frank? Anything else you could think of right now?
That's about it. People, there's a lot of pansies and snapdragons and stuff showing up that you get about 90 days of good spring color out of them. So the ladies that like to color up their gardens and their yards and their landscape beds, can jump in there and plant those right now. And of course, come mid-March, it's pretty much open season to do just about anything, but okra, watermelons, pumpkins, those kind of things. You want to wait a little bit longer. They like the heat.
Yes, sir. And again, this is Dr. Frank Summers that we're speaking to here, and every Saturday he has a segment on KMIL 105.1 The Ranch called the Horticulture Hotline. How many years you been doing that now, Frank?
Since 1986.
Oh, wow. Me and Chancey were 6.
Yeah.
Man, that's
I was 7. I was 79.
Man, wow.
I actually started it that far back, and I had been doing extension programs for a long time as an extension agent. They had a riff in 86, and I hung around, and they got me to come on and do the horticultural hotline in late 86, early 87. Been doing it ever since.
And yeah, now in this day and time, you can listen to that wherever you are because KMIL 105.1 The Ranch is online.
Yep.
And
you bet.
Yeah, and so so me and Chancey, we wanted to have Frank on our show here for you today to give you some good advice. And even though he had never asked us to be on his show, but that's just the way life goes. Yeah, see him 2 or 3 times a
killing me,
week, and he
Fred.
never once asked me to be on the show. But that's
You're
okay,
killing me.
Frank. That's okay.
I hear you.
No,
I
that,
didn't know y'all were going to abuse me.
no, we appreciate you being on with us today, my friend, and we hope that you have a good year and good gardening year, and we'll get you back on a little later in the season to talk about where we are in
All right.
the gardening year.
Hey, thank you,
Sounds
Frank.
good.
I appreciate
bet.
you,
Y'all
bud.
take care.
Yeah, have a good
You
day.
bet. You too. Bye-bye.
That man just has so much knowledge, man.
Yes,
It's
yes, he
unreal.
does. Yeah, he could talk all day about that.
Yeah, he really is. And like I said, his show, I remember we'd listen to it all the time. You know, when I worked at the hardware store and the feed store every Saturday morning, you know, it's good. They just loved that show.
Yes, yes, and so anyway, we hope you got something out of today's show. Went a little overtime with having Dr. Summers on today, but it was always good to sit down and visit with you, Chancey. We wish we could get together more than every 6 months to talk to everybody, but life has gotten busy, and we're chasing kids, and we're working all our 2 or 3 jobs and doing different things. So it's always good to get together and talk with Chancey and put something together for you guys. So we hope you enjoyed the day, and I guess until next time, we'll see you later.
All right. Bye-bye, y'all.